If you understand how to properly invest into the stock market, it could be among one of the easiest ways to build wealth over time passively. In fact, one of the best investors of all time, who's one of the wealthiest in the world, Warren Buffett, says if you invested in a very low-cost index fund where you don't put the money in at one time, but average in over 10 years, you'll do better than 90% of people. That is exactly why my motto with stock market investing is through index funds, which if you don't know what they are, it's pretty much a way to buy hundreds to even thousands of companies all within one purchase that track a specific market. So what I've learned myself is that instead of spending a crazy amount of time researching the markets and trying to play around with different investments, that's simply finding a few of the best index funds that you prefer, then setting up a plan to recurringly invest into them to then go on and live your life is among the best way to utilize the stock market, at least in my opinion. But I do truly believe that anybody watching this video can benefit greatly from these three index funds that I'm about to show you. Whether you're young, just starting off looking for growth, or at retirement looking for an income, if you allocate these index funds based off of your personal position, then I believe it can fulfill most, if not all, the needs that you would need within a portfolio, which I'll show you near the end of the video how different portfolios using these three index funds would have performed historically. So knowing that, to get straight to it, the first index fund would be a total stock market fund. Now, a total stock market index fund is simply a way to invest into the broad US economy that includes publicly traded companies from really small size all the way up to large ones like Apple and Microsoft. A quote I like for this is from Jack Bogle, who is the founder of Vanguard and known for the creation of the first index fund, where he says that index funds eliminate risk of individual stocks, market sectors, and manager selections, so the only thing left is stock market risk. I find this valuable because when you buy a total stock market index fund, you are being exposed to the broad US economy, and if the US economy continues to develop, which historically it has done very well, then so will your investments. Now, one of the most popular options that I like to refer to with this kind of index fund is Vanguard's total stock market ETF with the ticker VTI. Because this is an ETF, the simplest way to view it is that you can purchase it on nearly any platform, and it trades similar to how you would trade any individual stock. The difference here is that instead of buying one stock like Apple, where you now own Apple stock, if you were to buy VTI, you would now own 3,656 stocks all within one purchase. And because this fund tracks the CRSP US Total Market Index, that means you are getting exposed to large, mid, and small cap stocks across growth and value styles. Now, this fund is market cap weighted, which means that the companies that are inside of the fund are going to be given weight based off of their size, and it's going to continuously adjust over time along with market conditions. For example, as of this video, you can see the top 10 holdings in this fund consist of Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia, where each one is between roughly 5 to 6%, and that makes sense because they're currently the three largest companies by market cap in the US. The fund also has its largest sectors being technology at 33%, then consumer discretionary at 14%, industrials at 13%, and financials and healthcare thereafter. A fund like this is among the best for safe overall growth over time, as it has averaged a 12.78% return over the past 10 years, where since 2001, that average is 8.87%, which that includes all costs it takes to own the fund, which is also referred to as the expense ratio, where for this fund, that is 0.03%, which is really cheap for what you get out of it. Now, besides ETFs, you could also consider getting an index mutual fund, where the main brokers you would get this on could be Fidelity, Charles Schwab, or Vanguard. Now, mutual funds are known to be less tax efficient than ETFs, but with index funds, that's not really a huge concern. But I will say, in a normal taxable account, I only use ETFs, but within my Roth IRA, I actually have a select amount of index mutual funds. But if you are trading on Fidelity, they have two mutual funds that you may be interested to learn more about, with the first one being their zero fee version, that is the Fidelity Zero Total Market with the ticker FZROX. This one is relatively new when compared to their original total market index fund with the ticker FSKAX. Or say you're on Vanguard, you could then consider their ticker VTSAX, but just know they have a $3,000 minimum investment requirement. Or if you're investing on Charles Schwab, you may be interested in SWTSX. So all these track a total US stock market index, so they're going to be extremely similar, but some differences. If we look at FSKAX on Fidelity, they have a 0.015% expense ratio, which is slightly lower than VTI's, where the fund also has a few more holdings, now being at 3,839. And since it was created in 1997, this fund has averaged an 8.94% annual return. So by simply getting one total stock market index fund, I view this as the foundation to an investment portfolio portfolio, and although past performance does not guarantee future results, by averaging a 9% annual return over time, you are going to be able to compound your money extremely well. The last thing I'll mention on shortly is that instead of getting one US total stock market index fund, you could instead get a small, mid, and large cap fund. I personally like doing this because I get to control how much of each I own and see how they perform over time. So if you're curious for ETFs, you could consider Vanguard's small cap VB, mid cap VO, and large cap as referred to as the S&P 500, that is VOO. Please understand that VOO and VTI have an 87% overlap between the two, so you do not need both of these in the same account. The holdings are very similar. And then on Fidelity, the ones I personally use in my Roth IRA are small cap FSSNX, mid cap FSMDX, and large cap the S&P 500 index fund with the ticker FXAIX. But to keep things simplest, you could gain all the exposure you would need to the US economy all within one total stock market index fund, specifically one like VTI. Moving on from there, the next index fund is a large cap growth index fund. Now, a large cap growth index fund simply refers to getting large US companies that are expected to outperform the market. The best ETFs to consider here consist of SCHG, VUG, and QQQM. I'll use SCHG here as the example, where the fund has a 0.04% expense ratio. It tracks the total return of the Dow Jones US Large Cap Growth Total Stock Market Index. The easiest way to see how this works is by the top holdings in the fund that are Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft, but now they contain much more weight toward the fund, each being above 11%. You can then see the top sectors include 48% infotech, 13% consumer discretionary, and many more thereafter. The biggest reason why I view this as a strong investment to hold long term is because it contains many different market sectors, so who knows what could happen in the next 10, 20, 30, or even 40 years, but it will automatically adjust based off of the performance of different markets over time. Where if you were to pick one stock, or more so one market sector index fund, it could do very well short term, but who knows what it could do in 20, 30, or 40 years. So looking at a fund like SCHG, it has a 48% overlap with the total stock market ETF VTI that I just mentioned, but the allocation towards growth allows for your money to compound much more over time. In fact, SCHG has averaged a 16.48% annual return over the past 10 years, and since it was created in 2009, the average is 16.36% per year. Where if we look at QQQ, which if you're curious, QQQM tracks the same index, but it's just a newer, cheaper alternative, so there's not as much data that goes back. But this fund that tracks the NASDAQ 100 index has beaten the S&P 500 8 out of the past 10 years. In fact, since it was created in 1999, the fund has outperformed the S&P by 423% in total returns, becoming a comparison of 1,002% of total growth compared to the S&P 500 at 579%. So just looking back at the data, if you had $10,000 in this fund in 1999, that would now be worth $110,000, which does not include any additional contributions you could have made into it throughout the years. If you're curious, the Fidelity version I use in my Roth IRA is FSPGX, and for the Schwab, they have SWLGX, and Vanguard has VIGAX. Because of that, this last index fund to fulfill the 3-fund portfolio would be a strong dividend equity index fund. When I say a strong dividend equity index fund, this refers to getting an index fund that tracks strong dividend paying companies that also provide strong returns over time, so you get the benefit of both sides. This is beneficial to understand because if you're younger, looking for more growth, but you want to start building up a defensive portfolio using a stable dividend index fund, you could reinvest the dividends throughout the years of building up all your investments, and then when you come to a point where you want an income, instead of reinvesting it, you can just take it out. The nice thing about this is that if you take the dividends as income, your investment will still be able to easily outpace inflation. So the best fund for this, in my opinion, is Charles Schwab's ETF SCHD, as it tracks the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index that currently has 103 holdings that consist of Lockheed Martin and pretty much all other strong dividend investments where they have to meet specific criteria, and you can see each one has roughly 4% weight toward the fund. Looking even deeper into this, the financial sector has the highest amount of exposure at 17.3%, then healthcare, consumer staples, industrials, and energy thereafter. I will say one of my favorite things about investing into this fund is that there is only an 8% overlap with the S&P 500, so adding this just helps diversify your investments, where over the past 10 years, this fund has averaged an annual return of 11.71%. Yet alone for SCHD, the fund comes at a low 0.06% expense ratio, has a dividend yield of 3.42% over the past 12 months that has also grown its dividends recently at an 11.94% rate. What's also nice about SCHD is that the worst year over the past 10 years was down 5.5%, where the total stock market fund was down 19.5%. On top of that, the dividends with SCHD are noted to be 100% qualified dividends and are distributed on a quarterly basis. Now, I've spent a ton of time researching dividend ETFs. I made recent videos on them, but I have not found another ETF or mutual fund that is as good as SCHD when it comes to dividend equity. If you believe there is one better, consider putting it in the comment section below for others and myself to research more into. Which, while you're at it, if you are finding value in this content, all I ask is that you consider subscribing with notifications on for future content like this. With that said, now that you know 3 index funds for an ultimate portfolio, here are the generic ways you could allocate them and how they would have performed historically. The first portfolio I'm going to show you is if you are one looking for more growth. So let's say you put 50% toward the total stock market index fund VTI, 40% toward growth with SCHG, and 10% toward defensive, that is SCHD. With this portfolio over the past 10 years, you would have generated an average 14.14% annual return, which actually beats the S&P 500 over the same period. That would have been 13.15%. The next portfolio you may be interested in could be to just split each of the 3 evenly. As you can see, 34% toward VTI, 33% SCHG, and 33% SCHD. This portfolio would have generated a 13.76% annual return, which is still higher than the S&P 500 returns. Or say you wanted to focus more on the dividend income side, you could put 40% toward SCHD, 50% toward VTI, and 10% SCHG, which would have returned a 12.71% annual return, which is just lower than the S&P 500, which those returns and the ability to generate an income through qualified dividends using SCHD without needing a retirement account, I don't see anything wrong with it. That is exactly why I believe anybody could benefit greatly from this 3-fund portfolio, because if you're on the younger side, you could allocate more toward growth, and as you get older, you could then transition more toward the dividend equity. Also, if you're one that wants exposure outside of the United States, you could get an international fund, but understand that large US companies like Nike and McDonald's, they generate a ton of their revenue from operations outside of the United States. Now, if you find content like this helpful and you want to learn more, I'll have relevant videos that I created for you that I think you could greatly benefit from in the description of this video, which while you're at it, I'll have links in the description below to different investment platforms that you may be interested to start investing with. For example, the one I use for dividend investing that is linked to a high yield savings account is through SoFi, where you can get $25 worth of free stock when you deposit at least $25. Or if you want to get their high yield savings account, you can get up to $325 depending on how much you direct deposit. And besides that, if you are interested to see how I allocate each of my investments and other exclusive content, consider checking out the Patreon I have linked in the description below. And as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this.